Welcome to the Alphagenix Podcast, where every week we speak to incredible guests from the world of health, well-being, biohacking, longevity, and of course, men's health. And today I'm delighted to introduce Alexander Bell. We're going to be talking about the pros and cons of technology. Welcome, Alexander.
It feels like I've been here before, Ross. I must.
So for everyone watching, this is the third time we've tried to do this. Considering it's about technology,
it's hilarious.
Welcome. Would you like to give a brief introduction to everybody watching?
Yeah, so I'm Alexander Bell, and I invented the telephone, or as I like to joke.
Well.
Yeah, to say I'm knocking on a bit now. So now I am the founder and managing director of Reality Media Group. We specialize in 360 virtual tours, virtual reality type content, really a sort of a production company. And I also speak on technology. So that's very much why our worlds crossed, I think. And I speak to audiences about our relationship with technology, how that impacts us, ourselves, our productivity, and how that can impact business and our personal relationships as well.
Yeah. And ultimately our health, of course, as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
How was it you went from virtual reality and just building the tech and being immersed in it to now talking about the dangers of it? What happened? What was the journey?
So, I'm still in that world, in that space. I still love the tech. I think we talk about sort of alternative realities and mixed realities and augmented realities and virtual realities. That whole space is incredible and is alight, and Apple are about to reignite it all over again with their it's going to be their first headset, which will be released this coming month. If rumors are to be believed, and from by all accounts, Apple don't do things by half measures. So this is going to be a pretty spectacular headset. I love the technology. When I very first I remember back in the early days of my being a teenager and being in a shopping center and seeing, the games shop had a virtual reality pod that you could go in and put this huge clunky helmet on, right? And you had this sort of, red, green and blue and black and white game that you could half interact with. And just being, blown away by the whole idea of it. And then growing up, being obsessed with technology, mobile phones, I'm just old enough to remember a time without the internet, but then also lived through the adoption of the internet, which I loved, absolutely embraced 100 million%. So I've always been a lover of technology, and that's gone through into the different businesses that I've done as well. And, probably the last 10, 11 years, been really solely focused on this sort of 360 space, and had a lot of fun within that space, and still love it to this day. But now I've got 3 boys of my own. I've gone through that parenting journey. I've come to a place where I've sort of realized that whilst I love the technology and the capabilities and what the future holds for us with these new technologies, I also don't want it to replace everything. And I don't want us to lose touch with our human connections, because I think those are so important. And I think that we are in a situation now where the balance between technology and humanity is kind of, is a bit like that. And you can guess which side is which.
Yeah.
And so I've always loved speaking. I've spoken for many years on the topic of virtual reality. But now I want to sort of really talk about the wider picture of technology and how that impacts everything.
Yeah, brilliant. Because technology itself is neither good or bad, is it? It's just technology.
Yeah.
It's how it's utilized that is necessarily good or bad. And you could look at that from plethora of different ways. But if we think about it from, let's say, from a humanity perspective, human connection, and also from a health perspective, whether that's mental health or physical health, one part of me thinks, well, there's a future where you put on an augmented reality headset and you can be running through the Grand Canyon, but in the safety of your own home. I can see how there's benefits to that. But then I can also see like some dystopian sci-fi movie where, we're sitting in a chair at home, plugged into the virtual reality, never leaving the house, never meeting another real human. Our food is delivered by a drone. We've got an IV set up, giving us some sort of extra nutrition, and we're all 50 stone because we don't exercise. So what do you think the future's going to hold?
I think that's certainly a possibility. I think,
isn't it?
I think so there's one of my very favorite quotes is, what seems inevitable today will become inevitable tomorrow. And I think, what seems impossible today will become inevitable tomorrow. And that's a quote by Albus Dumbledore. But I just love the whole concept of it. And I think it's so true, right? I talk about, there is no future now that doesn't involve technology. Like, we are on a path that we can't come back from. And actually, I think we've reached a point where you look at the impacts of climate change. I don't think we would be able to solve climate change without some serious input from technology to provide us some answers. So technology is not going away, right? We are living in a tech-first world. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, as you've alluded to. But I think where that will lead us to will be areas that is bad, that is really negative and is dangerous, is unhealthy. And I think we're at a stage now where we don't quite understand what that is, but actually most of us are interacting with it on a daily basis. You look at the impacts of social media. We're all starting to feel that there's something not quite right there in that space, but we're all still massively addicted to it and using it. Yeah. Now, I don't say social media is bad and we should all get off it, but I do think, and I'm not the only one, and there's lots of research and studies now that shows that, the net effect of social media is negative.
100%. Yeah, the algorithm just feeds our continual dopamine release.
Yeah,
you see it all the time, don't you? Like when you're out and about, and I'm guilty of this as other people, but it's like a subconscious thing. You just reach for your phone and pick it up.
Yeah. Well, if you do something, so on average, people will be picking up or touching or interacting their phones sort of around 100 times a day. Obviously, the ratio varies wildly between person to person, but if you say 100 times a day, and you've had an iPhone since the first few versions, you've had probably 12, 13, 14. I've had about sort of 15 years worth of habitual reaching and swiping and touching a predominantly full screen device. Mm-hmm. There's no way that you couldn't be completely addicted having had that much exposure to it. If I sat here and drank 10 pints of beer every day for the next 15 years, where would that lead me? Right. Yeah. So we're all totally hooked. But I think, just to come back to your, where does the future hold? I think those groups of sort of negative and positive will grow, and there'll be a portion of the population who just don't care. You look at anything, you look at alcohol, drugs, abuse, all that type stuff. There's an extreme end, and they're almost, yes, you want to be able to help them, but ultimately they need to decide to help themselves and accept the help. So I see that happening with technology in the future. There will be people who are just so hooked and so hate the world, but love what the virtual world offers them, that they're going to choose that path. Yeah. And then there will be, there'll be the other side who really fight against it, and there'll be these anti-tech towns that you'll go into, and there's no phone signals, there's nothing. They've locked the whole place down, and and that will be where the very last physical library in the whole world exists. So there'll be both ends of the spectrum, but there's this huge middle ground, which is going to be still dominated by the corporate machines who are making profits and ultimately finding ways to exploit our weaknesses as humans, which is we're suckers for, instant gratification. Yeah. So that's going to continue to exist.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, because I think you're the first ever person that I've spoken to feels the same as me. Like, I can't see any other future other than this hugely divided one.
Yeah.
Which is like the sci-fi movies we've seen before, where you have these super high-tech cities where they kind of see themselves as superior. Yeah. And then you have these people living underground or in a cave or in a field, which are seen as the rabble. I don't see a way that isn't going to happen personally.
No, I totally agree. But this is the crux of the problem. I don't know which camp I'd end up in because I love technology, and I can see the benefits from it, and I get the benefits from it on a daily basis, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I'm also acutely aware that that there are, I still struggle with trying to fight, the swipes that's happening, that my brain still wants to do because it's been trained habitually to do that. And it's just ridiculous. And then you get into the whole next generation conversation. So this is a problem. My eldest is 9 now. So I've got maybe 2 years before I'm really going to have to deal with him having his own device. We got him a laptop for Christmas because Santa agreed that it was a good idea, so that was great. But it was very much it's not his; it's a shared device that everybody has access to, and then it's just introducing him to the concepts of what he can do. But it's going to happen. There's no two ways about it. We're going to have to deal with that teenage issue, and it's a real problem. I see it all over, and I don't have a clear answer for how to deal with it, because if you say no, you're not having all these access to TikTok and to all of those socials and having your own device and taking it to school, and if you say no to that, again, there's the proof that's out there, and it's just obvious, the exclusion from the social circles that happens for those teenagers sends them down a destructive path anyway.
Yeah. So I wasn't ready for that when my children are a bit older than yours, 15 and 12, and myself and my wife were, the opinion you don't need a phone. Why would you need one? You're either at school or you're at home. But then it was that whole peer pressure. Well, my friends have all got one, so I need one, and we're like, wow, I hadn't thought of that. You never want your children to be at a disadvantage or be bullied for something they haven't got. So I personally wasn't prepared for that as a parent. It's an interesting dilemma, and same as you, I don't know which camp I'd end up in, because a huge part of me, is happy in nature and sees all the benefits of unplugging. Yeah, and yet so much of my life is still like this. We're online talking different parts of the world.
Well, we've come very close to having to do this on a nature walk without any technology, because the past 2 times technology, maybe that's the universe sending us a signal, Ross.
Yeah, I think you might be right. So so let's kind of think about the future then. So we've got all the VR stuff, and we've got Meta talking about the metaverse, and we've got NFTs being tokenized and all these things. What is the metaverse? What's different? Why is that different from the internet? Will we in the future all exist in this metaverse? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. Okay. So the concept of a metaverse is still a concept. That's the first thing to understand. You cannot go into a shop and buy a copy of the metaverse. Like, that doesn't exist. So I think I think that's the first thing we need to understand. It's not here yet, but it's being worked on. And the groundwork, the foundations is where all the excitement is happening at the moment. So if you said to me, right, plug me into the metaverse right now, I want to experience it. What I'd be able to do is direct you to put on a virtual reality headset and essentially get into a virtual environment where there would be other people, other bots potentially as well that you could interact with. A bit like a chat room, but with headsets on, like multi-Zoom room, but you're all interacting and you could see your hands moving in front of you because of the device and the headsets. So we're at a very, very early stage of what the metaverse could be. Ultimately, what the excitement is all about, and the technologies that are being built behind it, is all about trying to understand how we can take these really rich environments, which are very similar to what you'd see on a games console, right? Take these really rich, beautiful worlds and put it in a chat room type interface where lots of people can dive in and dive out independently and interact with each other in a real-time setting. Now, if you do that on a games console, which happens, that's nothing new. There's always a limit to how many players can actually play at one time in one server, or they split it out into multiple different versions of the server, so that you're not accessing the millions of players who are online all at once. You're doing it in quite a localized way. So, but that won't cut it for what this metaverse is going to be. So a lot of the technology is trying to figure out, well, how do we connect thousands and thousands of people all online at the same time with access to these almost infinite spaces, environments, and be almost as full-bodied as possible. And that's incredibly difficult to do. And the technology just isn't there yet, but it is coming. Absolutely is coming. You talk about the potential impacts of quantum computing. So we've been on an exponential growth with the chips and the technology behind computers for some time. That's now with the possibilities that quantum offer, that's now just going to go, not exponential. It's like out of this world big, what can potentially happen with quantum. And, I don't fully understand it, so I wouldn't be doing it justice to try and explain what it is. But essentially it's where we are today, computers work on zeros or ones. With quantum, they can be both. So it's like if you were trying to, if you had a 4-bit memory card, which I think 8-bit was the first one which used to exist, you'd have 8 potential zeros or ones, whereas within quantum, it would be 8 to the power of 8, because each one of those could be either. So it's just mind-blowing where the future lies from a hardware perspective. But we're so far away from that now that the metaverse in this ideological form just can't exist, but it will exist, because when the technology comes, there is, why wouldn't we want to exploit it? And the concept behind sort of why would people want to interact in that space?
That's what I was going to say, What's the benefit? Why would anybody want to do that? Because
there's almost infinite possibilities. So it's just it's like a dream state that you could potentially be in. Which there's, you can think of it like, well, that would be, why would I want to dream all day? Well, that's from an entertainment perspective, which is, there's going to be a huge market for. Why would you go and watch a film when you could access the film and live in Star Wars, right? And not just from playing a game, but you could actually walk into the bar, and have the cocktail and see. So there's the entertainment side. But then from the learning and productivity side, in terms of being put into a real-time training simulation, the capacity, the ability to understand and learn, from a history lesson with a textbook versus stepping into the battlefields of World War I and being able to speak to the soldiers and say, what's going on? How was it? and that's an AI bot that's a real person from what you can experience, it's just going to be incredible, absolutely incredible. So it's hard to fight against some of those ideas. The problem is, where's the cutoff point? When do you unplug and deal with the real world again? And that's the humanity question. And that's where I think it would be a real shame if we lost all of this, connection that we get from real people, from interacting with real people. There's, again, there's studies that have shown that the younger generations now place so much value on digital social relationships that, in their brains, it values and believes it as much as a real world relationship. And so they don't quite, understand, well, what's the difference between, having a conversation through Snapchat or something and having a history that's on there through messages versus going for a walk in the park with somebody. In fact, they would probably feel that going for a walk would be a waste of time because, they couldn't do other things whilst you were doing that. They can't, you might speak a bit too slowly for them. So, and equally, they don't have time to really think about a clever reply. So the quality of conversation, is technically less in real person than it can be through a digital device. But we know, and I know that, that's what living really is, is that face-to-face connection. And I just think it'd be a real shame if we lose that as a species.
Well, there's so much research and evidence that shows, one of the key things that we need to be healthy and live a long life is human connection. It's community. It's that sense of belonging, being part of something bigger, working together as a team. And actually, if you don't physically meet anyone, you just virtually meet them, that has to have an effect, surely. That can't be the same. So I wonder if our lifespan will reduce. We'll live in this world where we can go to space and meet aliens and do anything we want, go have our girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever could be, somebody famous, and we could live in that dream world. But will we live into 40, instead of 80?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and we don't have the answers to those. I know that, again, from a hardware perspective, within the virtual reality headset space, there is a lag time that you need to try and work to that can trick the brain that it is real. Whereas if there is a very, very slight, and it's so minute, but the brain knows it, then if there's a very tiny lag, it just knows, it just doesn't feel right. But there is a number that you can reach that the brain does feel like it's real life, it's in front of them. So, we are hardware essentially, and we can be tricked, and it will be figured out that this whole, it doesn't feel right putting a headset on. No, it doesn't now, but in the future, they're going to nail it. They are going to nail it. And I think it's going to be really interesting, whether it happens in our lifetimes or not, I'm not sure, but it's going to be fascinating to see, or it's, just as a thought experiment, as you rightly say, is there something in our DNA and our makeup that will just prevent the technology from being able to really get a hold of our brains, nervous system, everything else? Or is there something hardwired in us that will just go, I know that's not real, and therefore my body is going to fight against that, and therefore suddenly we're back to living to 40 again? It could happen. You could totally see it happening.
Yeah.
Evolution will fight back.
I hope there's something in there, and we can't just hack our brain to live in a virtual world forever, because whilst I can see there are certain benefits, you could walk into a nuclear power plant that's about to blow up and figure out how to fix it. Or you could, there's so many advantages, I guess, for the benefit of mankind, space exploration and exploring the bottom of the sea. All those sorts of things I'm sure could be augmented and improved on, and should ultimately save people's lives and help, I guess, humanity move forward. But ultimately, I just see it as a big problem. I can see us all getting unhealthier and too attached to the technology.
I agree. And the other side is we're thinking about this from a relatively privileged position. So, we live in a part of the world where we have lots of benefits. Life is pretty good on the whole. You think about the areas in the world and the amount of the population who, still don't have access to clean water or even reliable energy. And there's still a huge, whether it's, I think over 10% still don't have access to clean water, something like that. Fast forward, when those parts of the world are able to interact with this level of technology, if the conditions of their lives still haven't vastly or greatly improved, and you're faced with the potential of plugging in to this Hollywood, lives, like, that's really difficult.
What are you going to choose?
So, and who is it, for us who already have that privileged real world to prevent them or to say that they shouldn't have access to it? That's a really, really deep question, which again, I don't have the answers to, but that's going to happen. We talk about, who's the next billion to come online, right? That's sort of a figure that's thrown about. And there seems to be a movement from sort of the West to say, well, how do we, capitalize on the next billion? And there's a big pushback to say, well, no, they should really, do it and benefit from it themselves, which I absolutely agree with. But when the difference between an online sort of space and world versus their, once they turn off the devices and go back to real life, it's really hard to see why they would choose not to sort of almost, live in that reality version. I'm talking way in the future now, but
like Ready Player One.
Exactly. It's the same concept of, well, if we screw up the Earth, we'll just move to Mars. That's not really the answer, is it?
Let's try not screwing up Earth. I guess you mentioned before as well about we know there are some negative aspects to social media. There's some quite high profile cases, hasn't there, where teenagers in particular have took their own life. And that's from cyberbullying in its current iteration. But imagine what's possible in a virtual world. Like, that's like bullying on steroids. I can't even imagine what someone's imagination could conceive. So there has to be some checks and balances, doesn't there? Otherwise it could just run wild.
I think it's regulation is potentially key to this. The whole AI discussion is fascinating at the moment, because there's a big push to say we need regulation. We need governments to step in. But give me an example of when government intervention has happened fast enough with the right resources, with the right intentions, and fixed a problem. Like, nobody can give me an example of when that has ever happened with those criteria. So it's very important. It needs to happen, but it ain't going to happen fast enough. We're still now to, the UK online safety bill, which is going through the rounds at the moment, is so dated already that by the time it actually comes into law, then it's so ridiculous, and you've got the likes of the encryption levels of messaging. And at the moment, the current version of the bill, WhatsApp is sort of saying, well, we would just pull out of the UK altogether and Europe altogether, because, what you're fundamentally saying is that we wouldn't be allowed to have this level of encryption from peer-to-peer messaging. Well, yeah, that's clearly not an answer. And equally, any government is not going to sort of pick a fight with Meta directly head on without losing, fundamentally.
Yeah.
So regulation is really important. However, it's us as users that have the power. So again, you're seeing now in the younger generations that the level of engagement with Facebook as a platform is just going down and down and down and down and down. It's still very high, an hour a day or wherever it is on the average user. But it isn't the 4 hours that it used to be, whereas other platforms are taking that time and growing in popularity. So I don't think that's being done from a moral standpoint yet. I think it's just they're just chasing attention, is just chasing the latest shiny thing. But I think we're seeing it in the climate change space. People are starting to get it and starting to value the right thing and the right decisions that are being made by companies from an ethical standpoint on key issues. And I think our attention as humans, essentially, being taken advantage of is going to become one of those key things. And so I think users, whether it's going to take another 10 years or however long, but I really do think this is going to happen, we will look at these platforms and go, do you know what? Actually, I know that you're profiting from my attention. I can see the exploitation of adverts that you're serving up and throwing in my face, and I'm not going to use the platform anymore. And that change in dynamic of consumers taking a decision to leave a platform because they know that fundamentally it's not giving a positive, a net positive societal impact, will dictate that those, the existence of those platforms.
That relies on a large portion of the population feeling strongly. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't think that will happen. I think you've probably got, 10% at either end of the population that have polarizing opinions and are very vocal about their opinions. Most people live in the middle, which is kind of, they'll do anything for an easy life. They want to rock the boat too much. So they could have an opinion, but it's not strong enough for them to do something. And I think that's quite scary, because things slide, things happen, people don't voice their opinions, and things change, don't they? And I think technology is probably one of those things where people go, well, yeah, I can see both sides, but then they get sucked in. And
no, I agree with the whole in my in my plan there being the general public, and that's why fundamentally we'll just move to these small remote towns that still have a library. So but I just hope, and I agree with your points, but I do get the feeling that the general sort of population are starting to make interesting changes. So you look at smoking, right? So I grew up, smoking was cool. Calvin Klein models on the adverts, on the billboards, smoked, and we were like, yeah, smoking is cool. So we smoked. Similar with alcohol to a large degree. And I think only until recently with alcohol, it's starting to become this, questionable area, and sort of the teenagers now, aren't sat in a field drinking cider like my teenage years went. So there are things that are starting to change now. I don't know if that's because it's being replaced potentially by technology, actually, and perhaps that has a huge part to play in it. So I just hope that in future, there is a sense of there's greater transparency between who's behind these platforms, which is happening now. And again, regulation is probably helping with that to bring things to the forefront. But then also this sense of, well, if you're not green, I'm not going to buy you, which I think is happening now. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, I think all of those things you just mentioned really are driven by the media and big pharma, because if we go back 100 years, the medical professional were like, your doctor smokes Marlboro, so you should too. And asbestos is really great. So it was kind of driven by big pharma, but ultimately marketing. So we were told smoking is healthy, therefore do it. Even your doctor does. Then we were told that it's unhealthy, so all we're doing is doing what we're told. Or when was it? When we were young, celebrities drank Baby Sham or whatever that advert was on. The advert, and then that wasn't cool. And now people are starting to talk in the media that alcohol perhaps is toxic. Ultimately, I think as a race, we just do what we're told. So, and I haven't seen anyone on a large scale talking out against technology. So I think we're just going to go along with it, because all the big platforms are saying, come and live in my world. You can have a free, I don't know, trip to the moon. Or
bottle baby sham. Bottle of virtual baby sham.
Virtual one, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, but I think there is a greater awareness of how things impact us.
Yeah, but that's only because we've been told that.
Yeah.
Again, so we'd been told now carbon net zero and we're changing the climate and all those things. But if that wasn't on the telly, people wouldn't change the way they were acting. So someone on a big scale has to also say technology isn't necessarily all that for us not to adopt it.
Yeah.
But then the other side of that coin as well, I remember talking to one of my daughter's friends' dads. This is like 10 years ago. Our children were swimming and we were just sitting by the side of the pool chatting as you do. And he said, do you realize our children are going to grow up and probably do a job that doesn't exist today?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I remember it hit me like a brick. Like, wow, that is fascinating. And it's true. Yeah, we can't imagine what jobs are going to be around the corner because they haven't been invented yet. And they will probably require technology. So we can't say technology is bad because you're going to need it to make a living in the future. So
and again, my own standpoint from somebody who gets paid to stand on a stage and speak about this stuff isn't that technology is bad, because I love the tech. It's more about the use of tech and understanding that there is good and bad usages. So let me give you a really clear example. So productivity. Okay. From what I can see, there's 4 levels of product, 4 scenarios where you are productive, where technology is involved. So there's the first sort of area, which is where most of us are. We have multiple devices, multiple screens, multiple things open all at the same time. And cognitive ability is impacted by that massively. We're effectively multitasking. We all know that is not a way to be particularly productive. We're very easily distracted with things coming in at us left, right, and center, notifications, email, pings. And even if we've switched those off, our brain has become so in tune to them that it's waiting for them. And that in itself is impacting us. So in fact, there was a study that showed that even the vibration of your phone is your brain is so wired up to it that it's effectively the same level of awareness if somebody shouts your name from across the room. So interesting. So you've got this thing in your pocket, almost always shouting your name. Right? Yeah. You have to listen to it. So that's kind of state 1, where you think you're just distracted, right? You are just distracted. Stage 2 is where you've achieved Zen-like status and you've wiped out all the technology and you're back to piece of paper and a pencil, and you are so dialed in that you're incredible. Well, that's just not an option for anybody, really. As you've said, we need technology in order to work, to live. We enjoy technology, so we're never going to give it up. So, bucket 2 is for a very tiny fraction of the population. Then there's the third way, which is you're aware of the impacts of technology and the distractions, and you've perhaps, put your phone on silent and moved it away. You've turned off some of the distractions. You've blocked some of the, YouTube and some of the sort of the rabbit holes that we often go down. So you're aware of how to sort of really tighten down and prevent the distractions from happening. And you're in a pretty good place, and you can be productive by doing that for sure. And it has real impacts. And that's a place that most people are starting to find themselves trying to, figure out a plan in order to get there, sort of swim against the tide almost. And that's great. And I absolutely, help people with that. But then there's an interesting fourth area, right? Which is where you're aware of all the impacts and the distractions and everything else, but you actually use the technology to your advantage. And this is where you can achieve sort of like a super state of productivity. And this is perhaps why technology will always win, because it offers these potential glimpses of superpower. And so an example of how I use that is a platform called focusmate.com. And what that does, you go on, you book your calendars out, either 25-minute or 50-minute sessions. It will match you with somebody else who's on the platform. Can be totally random, or you can favorite users and have friends and things like that. And you jump on effectively a Zoom call, and you say, "Hi Ross, what are you working on today?" And you'd say, "I've got 10 emails I need to do this hour." Great, I've got the same. We both mute, but we leave the cameras on and we work. And that level of accountability, as well as a little bit of social interaction, and just being, having somebody else sort of there, it's called body doubling as well. The technique is just incredible. Like, you are so focused, and, it prevents you from doing the little things like going and making a cup of tea 5 minutes after starting a task, and, checking your phone and things like that. But again, it's technology that's really allowing that to happen. Yes, you can do that in person, and you see it in libraries and things. And, if you go back to school, you would, sort of do that potentially. But, you'd end up chatting, and, you'd end up sort of having a joke, or, seeing what's going on. Whereas this is kind of, you're at a desk, you're meant to be working, you're meant to be working. This just takes it up, dials it up another notch. And I actually use my phone as the camera and the screen for it. So it means I cannot use my device for that 50-minute session.
Yeah, I like that.
And honestly, it's incredible. Like, the work that I can get done during those sessions is just off the charts level of productivity.
That was
focusmate.com. There are others. I've found that to be the best one. I've used it for a number of years now. I've done, I think, almost 4,000 hours on it. And it's insane. Like, it's off the level. I'm a huge subscriber to, getting things done, and, the Pomodoro techniques. This is kind of, linked to the Pomodoro idea of set a timer and focus on that task for 20 minutes and go again. But just, on steroids. It's incredible. So that's where I talk about technology giving you a superpower, but it has to be done in the right way. But what's interesting about it is it kind of shortcuts that need and that education to set up all the, app blockers. So if I do a day without FocusMate, I will go back to the old ways like that in an instant almost. I will find myself checking the phone. I'll be on socials. I'll potter about. I'll just waste the day essentially and do a fraction of the work that I should have been doing. So I haven't solved the problem. I haven't trained myself and dealt with the real issues. It's just a shortcut, and it's technology that's giving that shortcut.
And you've done 4,000 hours.
Yeah.
So does that tell us that you cannot unlearn the habits that technology form? Because 10,000 hours is a lot.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? People say
yeah.
that's still there, despite using this superpower. So that's quite a powerful statement in itself.
Yeah.
What other, for anyone who's listening, and what other superpowers are out there that we can use to our advantage? How can we benefit from this? Because so far our conversation has been quite negative, and always like to put across both sides. So, my opinion aside, where can we dial into this and improve? You've mentioned Focus Mate. Are there any other cool apps or things you've come across?
So on the sort of the preventative solutions, as I call them, there are things like there's apps that you can get which will help blocking some of those sites. There's tons of those available. But ultimately, if you can do an audit on your usage, which all devices have them. If you're on an iOS device, it's screen time. If you're on Android, you go into settings and it's digital well-being, and you dive into there and just start having a look at what you're doing and what you're using. And if you see that you're on Facebook on your phone, for 2.5 hours every day, then is that really necessary? What would happen if you removed it? And all the app blockers in the world have workarounds, right? Yeah. And if we know that there's a workaround there, you can end up scratching that itch again. So fundamentally, whilst I applaud the apps that help you do this, if you can get to the root cause and just remove the app altogether, that's often a far better solution. And then if you can't do that because you feel that you'd be disconnected in some way, and again, this is very social media driven, but that tends to be the biggest time block that you can attack first. Again, go into the settings on your device, and you can go into accessibility settings, and you can turn your screen to black and white mode. That's a really good tip, because social media is rubbish in black and white, right? It's absolutely terrible. And again, you'll get fed up of using it, and you'll come out of there. So that's a good technique.
I like that.
But again, it's about those controls of use, and your physical environment has a lot to do with it. So if your phone is still in the bedroom, then you better have a really good reason for that, because it's not helping you in any way, shape or form. So get it out of the bedroom, get an alarm clock, get a pen and paper by the side of your bed. And if you're really worried about missing that once in a lifetime emergency telephone call, well, put it on really loud and put it in another room, or, go real old school and get a landline. Give the key people in your life that landline number and say, look, it's going to be plugged in. If you have to ring us, then ring us on that landline. I can guarantee nobody's going to ring you. Like, it's just not going to happen. So there's all those types of things. And then it depends on the type of person that you are. So there's a really good app called Forest, which helps you to build up better tech habits, essentially. And the idea is that the less time that you spend on the apps that you identify as being a problem, your digital forest starts to grow, and and all the rest of it. So that works for some people, doesn't really work for me. I'm more of a
Tamagotchi.
Yeah.
You grow your forest by doing these things. Tamagotchis are like those little creatures.
Yeah. They still exist. In fact, we bought our son some. They got, they lasted about 3 minutes before they realized, this is so awful. But yet, good. If I think about the amount of hours that I must have spent on the Tamagotchi to keep it alive, like, it's crazy. But again, that's fascinating, because we were so susceptible even back then to a tiny little black and white, calculator screen that gave us something that we were happy to, waste hours of our days feeding this thing and cleaning up its poo and all the rest. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like Snake. Think about Snake. I mean, we all became world experts in eating apples with this tiny little snake. So that's where
hours and hours on Football Manager.
Yeah,
days on that at a time, like And
if you think about the first versions of those, it was just very simple graphical interface and text. You were essentially just the updates would come in, the results would come in, and there was no you couldn't even watch the matches back then.
Exactly. But it still worked on that on that subconscious level. You were just like sucked into it. It's crazy. I guess one of the positives we've not touched upon, like in health especially, is the monitoring. Real-time monitoring of health conditions. I've just ordered a continual glucose monitor to track that for the first time. So I should arrive hopefully tomorrow. 24 hours a day. You can see your blood sugar and insulin spiking. So real positive way to influence your health. So it's not all bad. Not all bad.
No, and again, you talk about smartwatches. Good friend of mine, diabetes type 2, relies now on the smartwatch essentially to tell her, when she's got something she needs to act on. Yeah. It's potentially life-saving. Well, it is life-saving, and it's incredible. But it also means that she's got a screen on her wrist.
Exactly.
Constantly pinging away. And I just smartphones are bad enough, but having it on your wrist, I mean, there's maybe it's because I'm hyper aware of it, but if you're having a conversation with somebody and they just tap that, it drives me up the wall. It's just like, are you even there? Are you even talking to me? And for a lot of the time, all they're doing is checking the time. Like it's the same as they would do with a wristwatch. But it's that the fact that that it's a screen. I just do not ever want to own a smartwatch because it's so bad. It's so rude. I think.
I was climbing a mountain over in South America back end of last year, and everyone had these watches on, and I had a little bit of that fear of missing out. I had a bit of FOMO because I was like, everyone was looking at the watch all the time. My blood oxygen saturation is this, the altitude is now that, and I was like, just want to get one of those. But ultimately, I decided actually I could listen to my own body anyway. I knew if I'd had a bad night's sleep, not because my watch told me, but because I felt it. So I decided against it in the end. It's an interesting one, but how can people reach out to you after listening to this? If you think, wow, I'd love to get Alex to come along and speak at our organisation, where can they find you?
Well, I think, I'm going to have to burn all my devices now. If they want to find me, they'll have to come and find me in my hobbit hole. But no, I am active on LinkedIn. That's the only platform I use. So you can put in Alexander Bell and I'll pop up on there. Or I think the URL is / Alexander P Bell. So they can grab me on LinkedIn. My website is alexanderbell.co. So they can find me on there as well. Or the VR stuff is wearereality.com. If they want to, engage in the VR discussions and the dark side of technology.
Thank you so much for today. There's a huge subject. Maybe we'll dive into some of the other parts on another episode, but I really appreciate your time and have a great day.
No, not at all. It's been an absolute pleasure. And hopefully we've made it and it's happened.
We have.
Something isn't going to happen from now on in. There's the hard drive gets wiped or something, so fingers crossed this makes it out live. But no, it's a huge pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ross.
No problem.
Take care.